Welcome back to Hot Air with me, Joshua Robert, the podcast where we say the things that you're thinking but maybe haven't said out loud. Today's episode is part one of a little two-part series, and we are starting at the beginning, as most two-part series do. The part that most of us get stuck in for way too longer than we should. We're talking about expectations, communication, and what it feels like when you're doing everything right, saying all of the right things, and still not getting what you need from someone. This episode is about the pattern. It's about setting the bar, clearly communicating your needs, giving chances, and slowly realizing that nothing is actually changing. We're getting into that frustrating space where you start questioning yourself. You're wondering if you're asking for too much or if you just need to explain it better just one more time. We've all been there. It's been a hot minute since I really did this deep therapy kind of personal vibe, and that is where we're taking this today. If you ever felt like you're putting in more emotional effort than the other person, or like you're stuck in the same conversation on repeat, hoping for a different outcome, like this is the episode for you. We're breaking down what's really happening in that cycle and why it is so hard to walk away from. Before we get into it, make sure you're following along on Instagram and TikTok at _HotAirPod, which I just realized I haven't posted on TikTok in a while. Forgot about that. You'll get little clips from the show, stories behind the scenes, all that jazz. You can also head to hotairwithjoshuarobert.com to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and send in your topic suggestions for future episodes. Also, don't forget to rate, review, subscribe, all of those things. If you leave me a review, I'm going to Venmo you $5. Okay. Send me a screenshot of your review. I don't even know if that's legal to say. That has to be legal, right? Leave me a 5-star review wherever you're listening, preferably on Apple Podcasts. Screenshot it, send it to my DMs. I will Venmo you $5. I'm actually not even kidding. Obviously, send me your Venmo. I'm going to pay you to rate me 5 stars. Oh, gosh. Now, this is an episode you might want to get your little journal for, your notepad. Sit down, listen closely, absorb. This is such an important lesson that I learned this last year. One of my biggest takeaways, not only from therapy, definitely from therapy, but just life itself. Like something switched inside of me. I finally was able to maybe put aside my own ego or my own expectations, and realizing all of this and the tools that I'm going to share with you, the experiences that I'm going to share with you, literally, like, I feel like I'm at peace, which sounds dramatic, but I'm just like, I am chilling. Those things that used to piss me off, frustrate me when I was begging, begging, begging for people to treat me a certain way, when I finally realized that wasn't gonna happen, and it took a while, took a lot of hard work, which is why we're doing this episode, it changed everything, okay? So, sit down, absorb it, and let's hit it. Part 1, the relatable pain. Okay. I need you to be honest with yourself, if not for a second, for this whole episode. Okay. We're opening up. We're being honest. We're letting the emotions fly. Have you ever sat down with someone, like really sat them down and you explained calmly, clearly, maybe even too nicely, too kindly, exactly what you need from them, and they still don't do it? They like not even close, not even a little bit of effort, not even a let me pretend that I fucking heard you, just business as usual, zero change. Because like if you have, welcome, samesies, you're in the right place. Okay. This is a safe space for people who have emotionally over communicated themselves into exhaustion. I am sitting comfortable. I am taking this episode very chill. I'm like, this is really important to me and very serious. And normally I'm not all that serious. Okay. I used to really believe, like, truly to my core, that if you just communicated well enough, people would rise to meet you. I thought communication was the ultimate fix. I was like, no, you guys don't understand. People aren't bad. They're just confused. They just need clarity. Like, how many ways can I say this? I need a thesaurus. I thought I was out here like solving relationships, like I was doing customer service for human behavior. I was like, "Have you tried explaining it better?" Like I was some kind of emotional genius. And meanwhile, I was just setting myself up for the longest, slowest disappointment of my life. And nobody likes to be disappointed. What actually happens, and maybe you live this too, is you communicate your needs and nothing changes, right? And your brain just it can't compute that. It does not make sense because maybe you're someone who someone tells you what they need and you adapt that and you try hard and you put effort forward, but not everybody responds that way. You're like, "Wait, did everything right? I didn't yell, I didn't shut down, I didn't play games, I didn't expect you to read my mind. I literally gave you a step-by-step instruction manual. I color coded it. I put tabs on it. I probably made it into a Google spreadsheet and shared access with editing permission with you, like all the things. And they still don't do it. And if this hasn't happened to you, you probably know somebody that it has happened to, whether it's a friend, family member, or a spouse. And that's when your brain starts spiraling, if not a little, a lot, because it's like, okay, maybe I didn't say it right. Maybe I need to say it differently. Maybe I need to be softer. Maybe I need to be less direct. Maybe I need to be harsher. Maybe I need to consider their feelings more. Maybe I need to not make them feel bad about the fact that they're not meeting my needs while also asking them to meet my needs. So now you're editing yourself. You're rewording, you're filtering, you're adjusting your tone, your delivery, your timing. You're waiting for that like right moment to bring it up again. And like you are basically becoming your own PR team just to ask for basic respect. And that's a small ask. That shouldn't be that deep. If you're not getting it, you're probably not going to get it. And the wild part is that you train yourself, and by you, the proverbial you, me included, to think that this is normal. You think this is just part of relationships. You're like, "Oh, well, this is just what it takes. This is compromise. This is growth." And no, babe, no, this is you bending yourself into emotional origami, trying to make someone comfortable enough to treat you better. Side note, I always wanted to learn how to do origami, okay? And listen, I say this all with love because I too was the CEO of that company, and sometimes I still am. I still catch myself sometimes in that little spiral. I had a full-time job managing other people's comfort levels while slowly abandoning my own needs. Like if there were awards for over explaining yourself in relationships, I would have a shelf full of trophies. I was out here giving TED Talks to people who didn't even attend the meeting. There was nobody listening, like glazed over eyes. It was going right over their heads. And the craziest part, I didn't even realize how much energy I was spending on it. I thought this was just normal. Like when you're in it feels productive. It feels like you're doing something. It feels like you're working towards a solution. You're like, no, no, no. We're making progress. We're having conversations. Meanwhile, the behavior from them stays exactly the same. And that right there is the part that we don't talk about quite enough because people love to preach about communication. Just communicate, just be honest, just express your needs. Like, okay, yes, that is step one. Perfect. But what happens when you do that and the other person still does not show up? What happens when you've done your part and nothing changes? And that is where things get very uncomfortable. That right there is where that narrative starts to break down because now it's not about communication anymore. Now it's about capacity. And that is a much harder pill to swallow. And when this happens, it forces you to consider something you probably don't want to consider, which is that this person might not be capable of giving you what you're asking for. And it's very similar to, like, if he wanted to, he would in my dating episode. It doesn't mean like, they're not unwilling, they're not confused, not they just need time. Some people just are not capable. It doesn't compute, and I know some of you are already like, "No, but they can. I've seen it. They've done it before." And, like, sure, one time on maybe a good day, under perfect circumstances, when the stars aligned and Mercury was not in the microwave, like, maybe one time. What about consistency? Consistency is the real measure. It's not potential, not flashes of effort, not the one time they showed up and now you've been living off that memory like it's a highlight reel. Like it's the best day ever, but like one time is not enough, people. Consistency, that is the key word. And if you're honest with yourself, for a lot of people in your life, the consistency is not there. And that realization, uncomfortable, it hits. Because now you're sitting there like, okay, like they've heard me. They've definitely heard me and they understand me and they still aren't changing. They've done it once, but they're not changing. So what does that even mean? And if you're hearing outside noises, it's raining. So just started raining a lot. But hopefully we can get rid of that in the editing process. My bad if it doesn't go away, okay? But this is where we start to get a little bit delulu. And I say we because I am including myself in everything I'm talking about today. Me, 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 me. I'm a Leo. Hey, instead of accepting what's in front of us, like we start creating reasons. We start to fill in a bunch of different gaps. We're saying that they're just stressed. They're going through a lot. They didn't mean it. They'll do better next time. They just need more time. And like, sure, sometimes those things are true, 100%. But when it becomes a pattern, when it becomes the same cycle over and over and over again, at some point, it's not a misunderstanding anymore. And you got to draw that line. This is your reality, their reality, it's reality. And I do think that deep down, we all know that. Like, if you really sit down with yourself, you know who shows up for you, you know who doesn't, you know who you have to over explain yourself to, and you know who just gets it. But admitting that, accepting that, that's a whole different story because once you do accept that, then you decide what to do with it. That's where people get stuck because it's easier to stay in the cycle than to face the truth. You decide where your boundaries are. You decide what to do with the people who get you and what to do with the people who don't get you. It's far easier to keep having that same conversation than to admit that that conversation isn't working and this relationship isn't working. It's easier to keep hoping than to let go of hope and to let go of what you wish the relationship could be. And I have lived in that space for a long time, like a very, very long time. I have a positive mindset. I believe in the best in people. I over communicate. I always hope for the best. I am like always in my mind manifesting fucking greatness. Like I believe I'm going to be on The View one day, okay, promoting my book that I'm working on. Like to me, that's not a foreign concept. So for me to just believe in the best in a person and for their ability to give me what I want because I feel like I'm giving them exactly what they need and what they want. And like also force feeding them a checklist of this is what I require. And then you live in that hope of what that relationship could be like. Like you live in that space for such a long time. Like I said, been there, done that. It's just going in circles though. Having the same conversation in different fonts, thinking if I just said it one more time, one more way, at one more perfect moment, something would click. And sometimes it does click, sometimes temporarily, sometimes permanently. You'd get a glimpse, a little effort, just enough to keep you hooked. And you're like, see, this is what I'm talking about. They can do it. And then that fades away. And you're back to where you started. And now you're even more confused because you've seen what's possible. So why can't they just stay that way? Why can't they stay there? And that question will drive you insane if you let it. You start chasing that version of them, the version that shows up, the version that meets your needs very rarely, the version that makes you feel seen, and you start ignoring the version that shows up most of the time. And that's where the real disconnection happens. You are not in a relationship anymore with who they are. You are in a relationship with who they could be. And again, I'm not even just talking about romance, friends, family included. And that is a very dangerous place to live because you will stay there forever if you don't catch it. And forever might seem like a long time, but we're only here once, bitches, okay? You will keep pouring into something that isn't actually giving back in the way that you need. You will keep adjusting yourself, explaining yourself, softening yourself, minimizing yourself, losing yourself, dimming your own fucking glow for someone who's never going to get it. When out there in the world, there are people that will. I said I was going to remain calm, so I'm reeling it in. She was heated for a moment. And you're doing all of this in the hope that one day they'll meet you there, and maybe they will, and maybe they won't. And this episode is about what happens when you finally consider the second option that they won't, because more often than not, they don't, because that's where everything changes, right? That's where the illusion begins to crack. That's where you stop asking, how do I get them to treat me better? And you start asking, why am I expecting them to be someone they've never shown me that they can be? And I know that's not a fun question, but it's an important one. It's the only question because the answer to that question is what's going to set you free? And that's where we're going to go soon. Stick with me. Because trust me, I don't land here gracefully. I don't want to wake up one day and go, you know what? Radical acceptance sounds lovely. Like, no, this was a process, a messy, frustrating, slightly humbling process that involved me realizing that I was fighting reality and reality was winning every single time. So, like me, if you've ever felt like you're doing everything right and still not getting what you need from someone, and if you felt like you're speaking and you're not being heard, and you felt like you're asking for something that's very, very simple and basic, and somehow it's still too much, I need you to hear this. Listen, focus in, hear this. You're not asking for too much. You might be asking the wrong person. And when that clicks, everything's going to shift. We're not there yet because before we get to that shift, we have to speak about the pattern. And trust me, it is a pattern. So, part two, the pattern. How many times can I say pattern? Because we're going to talk about the pattern. Okay, once you begin to zoom out just a little bit, you realize this isn't just a one time thing or a one person issue for that matter. This is a pattern that shows up in multiple relationships in different forms with different people, but the core dynamic is the same. And for me, a big part of that pattern was that I held people to a very high standard. Like I'm talking high people, but not in the way people usually mean when they say that. Okay. It wasn't about expecting perfection or expecting grand gestures or anything unrealistic. It was actually the opposite. I was expecting emotional awareness, communication, consistency, and effort, which in my mind felt like the bare minimum. It felt reasonable, it felt fair. And because it felt so reasonable and fair to me, I assumed that it would be reasonable and fair to the other people. And listen, before I even continue, if you're listening to this and you think, is Josh talking about me? That's a you question, honey, because I could be and I could not be. So if you feel like I'm talking about you, this message is probably for you and about you, and you helped me realize it, but the world doesn't revolve around you. So just just know that like anytime you're listening to an episode or anytime you're out in the world and you're like, "Oh, is that person talking about me?" That says more about you. So take the lesson because it's clearly like triggering something in you, but I'm not going to get into like specific humans today. This is a generalization of experiences that I've had around relationships. But if you are a friend, a family member, an ex who might be listening and you're like, "Oh, Josh is talking about me." Well, honey, take the notes, okay? Do better. So again, I thought these asks would be reasonable. However, that assumption is where things start to go a little bit sideways. Because I wasn't like just expecting people to meet a standard. I was expecting them to meet a standard that I operate at. I communicate very clearly. So I expected clear communication. I show up very consistently. So I expected consistency. I make an effort to understand people. So I expected that same level of understanding in return. And again, none of that feels outrageous. Like, I don't think it's crazy when I say it out loud. It actually sounds very healthy, very self aware, very like I've been to therapy and I'm doing the work, right? But what I didn't fully grasp at the time is that just because something is healthy doesn't mean it's universal. And just because it's healthy and easy for me to do doesn't mean it's going to be the same for others. Not everyone is operating from that same place. Not everyone has the same tools, the same awareness, the same emotional capacity, or even the same desire to show up in that way. Some people don't want to communicate. They don't want to talk about things. They like to brush shit under the rug. I'm like, lift that rug up, throw it out the window. Let's see the dirt lying underneath it. And instead of recognizing those differences early on, I would kind of override it. I would see the signs, I would feel the inconsistency, but I would tell myself like some random story that made it okay. I would think, well, they just communicate differently, or maybe they've never been shown how to do this, or maybe they just need time, or maybe I need to explain it differently. And while all of those things can be true, what I was really doing was extending grace in a way that ignored what the reality was. And grace without boundaries turns into self abandonment. And I was very, very good at that. Like, screw Josh. I'm going to work on these other people. I was very good at giving people the benefit of the doubt over and over again, even when the evidence was stacking up in front of me. And part of that came from a belief that if someone cares about you, they will rise to the occasion, that if you explain your needs and you give them the opportunity, they'll meet you there. And again, it sounds nice. It sounds hopeful. It sounds like something you'd see on a quote graphic on Instagram, but in practice, it doesn't always hold up. Caring about someone and having the capacity to show up for them in the way that they need are two very different things. Someone can care about you and love you and still not be able to meet your needs. Someone can have good intentions and still fall short consistently. And that's where things do get confusing because you're not dealing with someone who is outright dismissive or clearly toxic. You're dealing with someone who is just inconsistent. Sometimes they show up, sometimes they don't. Sometimes they get it, sometimes they completely miss the mark. And that inconsistency is what keeps you hooked because it gives you just enough to believe that things could be different because you've seen it before. And I really lean into that real hard, especially with romantic relationships. That's like very typical of me. I would focus on the moments where they did show up as proof of what was possible instead of looking at the full picture of what was consistent. I would think like, okay, see, they can do it. They just need one more time or more reminders or more patience from me. So I would give and give and give more explanations, more chances, more understanding, more emotional labor. And over time, that starts to create an imbalance that you don't even realize that you're in at first. So on the surface, it still looks like a relationship. You're still talking, you're still spending time together, you're still connected in some way, but underneath all of that, you're doing a lot more to maintain it than they are. You're the one initiating the conversation about growth. You're the one bringing up issues. You're the one trying to improve the dynamic. And they're just kind of like, they're just like there, complacent, not necessarily resisting, but not actively participating in the same way either. And when you're in that role long enough, that becomes your new normal. You start to think it's your responsibility to carry the emotional weight of the relationship. You start to think that it's your job to keep things on track. You make sure that communication is happening to make sure that issues are addressed. And because you're capable of doing that, you do it. But capability doesn't equal responsibility. And that's something that I had to learn the hard way. The more that I overfunctioned in that space and the more it allowed other people to underfunction, right? I was doing all the work so they didn't have to. Not because they were intentionally taking advantage, but because I was filling in all the gaps. Like a very simple example is like if you're always the one calling someone, they never have to call you. They just know that you're going to call, that you're going to reach out to them. And over time, that becomes the normal, and you fill that role. You're always the one to FaceTime. I don't know. This is an example. This is a random example. I'm not talking about my best friend. Like if I was always the one to FaceTime Jessica, right? My best friend who lives in Canada, and she never made an effort to FaceTime me, but that's because she knows I'm always going to do it. So they're going to take, and they just have to sit there and they don't have to do anything. But Jessica does call me a lot. I often don't answer her call. So you're allowing these people to underfunction, and not because they were intentionally taking advantage, as I said, but because you're filling in the gaps. You're doing all the work for them. Like I was compensating for what was missing. So there was no real pressure for them to step up. And then when I would eventually get frustrated and bring it up again, it would feel like it was coming out of nowhere to them because from their perspective, things were fine. Meanwhile, I had been quietly building resentment for weeks or months, or let's fucking face it, years. And that cycle just kept repeating. And it's always a shock to them when you point it out because they think everything's hunky dory, but I was doing all the work. I would notice something wasn't working. I would bring it up. There would be a little shift, maybe things would feel better for a moment. And then everything would slowly drift back to like this very shitty baseline. And every time it happened, I would tell myself a slightly different version of the same story to justify staying in it. I would say, like, well, relationships take work or growth isn't linear or at least they're trying. And again, none of those statements are like inherently wrong, but I was using them to avoid a more comfortable truth, which is that the baseline itself was the problem. I wasn't actually okay with that baseline. I was tolerating it in hopes that the baseline would eventually change. And that, my friends, is a trap. When you're constantly operating from the hope of future change instead of the reality of current behavior, you end up building relationships on potential instead of compatibility. And potential is not something you can rely on. It's unpredictable, it's inconsistent, it's dependent on factors that are outside of your control. Compatibility, on the other hand, is based on what is actually happening right now. And when I started to really look at that without softening it or explaining it away, it was kind of a wake up call. I realized that in a lot of my relationships, I wasn't actually being met where I was. And by a lot, I mean a lot of them. And frankly, I would say 90% of them. It's not an exaggeration. It might even be more than that. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, like I would say 100% of them. 100% of my relationships, I felt like I was doing most of the work, if not all of the work, and I was overcompensating. I was certainly not being met in the middle. And when you look at that, like the common denominator is me. Therefore, I'm overextending myself unnecessarily, which made me resent almost everyone. I was not being met where I was. I was meeting people where they were and then trying to pull them up to meet me. And that's fucking exhausting, people. That's not a partnership or friendship or relationship. That's a project. And people are not projects. You don't need to fix them. Like, it's not your job to fix them. Although sometimes it feels great. It can be helpful, but it's people aren't projects. When you're used to being the one who sees potential, who believes in people, who wants to help them grow, it's very easy to slip into that role without even realizing it. It feels like you're being supportive, like you're being patient, like you're being understanding. And again, those are all great qualities to have. Pat myself on my back. But when they come at the expense of your own needs being consistently unmet, that stops being a healthy relationship. It becomes a pattern of overextending yourself in a relationship that isn't giving you the same energy, if any energy, back. The hardest part about recognizing that pattern is that it forces you to look at your own role in it, not in a self blaming way, but in an honest way. It's not just about what other people aren't doing, it's about what you're allowing, what you're tolerating, and what you keep choosing to stay in. And if you keep choosing to overextend yourself, at the end of the day, you can't control how someone else shows up, but you can control how long you keep expecting them to show up differently. I am going to say that again. You cannot control how someone else shows up, but you can control how long you keep expecting them to show up differently. That is deep, and that is where the shift starts to happen. But before we get to that shift, we have to talk about what it looks like when you keep fighting that reality and when you keep trying to force change, when you keep having the same conversation, hoping for a different outcome. That phase is where a lot of the emotional exhaustion really comes from. Part three, fighting reality. So, this is the part where it starts to wear on you, even if you don't fully realize it yet. Up until now, everything still kind of feels manageable. You're having conversations, you're giving chances, you're telling yourself it's normal for things to take time. There's still a sense that you're working towards something, that if you just stay patient and keep showing up, eventually it's going to click. But what you don't notice at first is how much energy you are burning trying to make that happen. Fighting reality is exhausting in a very specific way. Like, that is not a loud thing. It's not always dramatic. And sometimes you don't even realize it. Like, it's not obvious. It's quiet, repetitive, and constant. It's having the exact same conversation over and over again in slightly different wording, hoping this time it will land differently. And sometimes you're having that conversation in your head. Like, I used to do this while I was driving to work. I would think like, how can I formulate this differently? How can I express this differently? And I would have these imaginary conversations, whether it was with friends or family or relationship. And then I would go have those conversations later and it wouldn't go to plan. And then I would do it all over again the next day, driving to work. How can I say this differently or do this differently? Like, you're having double the conversations, taking double the energy, double the brain power. Like, that's exhausting. Like, you're thinking like, how can I bring this up before you even bring it up? Anticipating their reaction, softening your delivery, trying to make it as easy as possible for them to hear you, and you're just struggling. It's the mental rehearsal part, the emotional preparation, and always constant adjusting. And you don't clock it as exhaustion at first because it feels like effort. It feels like you're doing something important. It feels like you're doing what you're supposed to do in a relationship. You're communicating, you're being patient, you're trying to understand. And over time, that effort starts to weigh on you. It feels heavier. It starts to feel one sided. And there's this low level frustration that builds because no matter how many times you go through the cycle, the outcome doesn't really change. And that frustration starts to filter into all other aspects of your life. That's when you start to push even harder to fix the relationship. You start thinking like, okay, maybe I haven't been clear enough about how serious this is. Maybe they don't understand the impact it's having on me. So you go deeper. You explain more. You open up more. You try to really make them see from your perspective. And sometimes in those moments, it can feel like they get it. Like they're nodding along, they respond, they acknowledge, they might apologize. And for a second, you feel relieved. You feel like maybe you've been heard. You feel like, okay, this is a turning point. They really get it. But then nothing actually changes. Or it changes for a very short period of time, just long enough to give you that little spark of hope, and then it slowly drifts back into the same pattern. That's the part that starts to mess with you because you've seen the awareness. You've seen that they can understand it. So why isn't that translating into consistent action? This is where the internal conflict really kicks in. So part of you is like, okay, they heard me. They care. They just need time to implement it. And another part of you is like, but how much time is reasonable? How many times do I need to say the same thing before it sticks? And you start to feel this tension between wanting to be patient and starting to feel resentful. And one thing I noticed about resentment, or that I've learned about it, is that it doesn't show up all at once. Resentment builds slowly. It has so many layers. It's every time something happens that you've already talked about it. It's every time you have to bring up the same issue again. It's every time that you feel like you're the only one actively trying to improve things. And because you're still in the mindset of trying to make it work, you don't always express the resentment directly. You might push it down, you might brush it off, you might tell yourself it's not a big deal, but it's there and it's growing. And eventually that shit is gonna, if it's not leaking out, is gonna explode out. Why'd I have to say leak? Maybe that resentment comes out in your tone. Maybe it comes out in your patience getting a little bit shorter. Maybe it comes out in small moments where you're more reactive than you normally would be. And then suddenly you're in this position where you're not just frustrated with them, you're frustrated with yourself because you're like, why am I still here? Why am I still having this conversation? Why does this keep happening? And that's when things start to feel chaotic internally because you're holding two conflicting beliefs at the same time. One is that this relationship matters to you and is worth working on. And the other is that it's not actually improving in the way you need it to. And instead of choosing one, you're trying to hold on to both. So you double down again. It's like insanity, is it not? Like saying it like this, like it's a list is crazy, but we do this. You give another chance. You have another conversation. You try another approach. Maybe this time you're more direct. Maybe this time you're more calm. All the things. But overall, the pattern doesn't shift. And listen, this is important. Data versus hope. The distinction and the difference matters. This is the point where you like really have to pause and start taking note. If you step back and you look at the data, it's actually very clear. The data is their behavior over time. That is the data. What is their behavior over time? The data is what they do consistently, not occasionally. The data is the pattern, not the expectation. And the data in a lot of these situations is telling you the same thing over and over again. This person is not showing up in the way you need them to. But hope is very loud, far louder than data. Hope is the voice that says, but they can. Hope is the voice that points to the one time they got it right and says, see, that's who they really are. Hope is the voice that keeps you invested, that keeps you trying, that keeps you believing that if you just give a little bit more time, a little more effort, then things will shift permanently. And hope isn't a bad thing, not in itself. It's actually a great thing, a beautiful thing. It's what allows us to believe in growth, in change, in possibility. But when hope is not aligned with data, that becomes another trap. Now you're not responding to reality, You're responding to a version of reality that you wish existed. And listen, when I tell you I lived in that space for a long time, I ain't lying to you. I kept choosing hope over data. I kept prioritizing what someone could be over what they consistently were, or what I just wanted them to be. And every time I did that, I was essentially signing myself up for the same outcome. I was setting myself up to go through the same cycle again, just with slightly different expectations, approaches, conversations, and eventually you hit a point where like you just can't ignore it anymore. Like you feel like you're losing your fucking mind. There's usually a moment or like maybe a series of moments where it begins to click in a different way. And it's not dramatic. It's not a big like blow up. Sometimes it is. Mine might have been. Or like it's not a defining incident. It's actually usually it can be very quiet. It's just this internal realization that you've been here before, that this situation, this exact conversation, this exact feeling is not new. And something in you just gets tired, not angry, not reactive. You're just tired and you give up. And that giving up feels so weird when you lived in that place of hope for so long. You got tired of explaining, tired of hoping, tired of trying to get a different result from the same pattern. And in that moment, there's this shift where you start to see things a little bit clearer and you start to recognize that it's not about whether they understand you or not. And it's not about whether they care about you or not. It's about whether they are actually able to show up differently in a consistent way. And that is a much harder question to sit with. If the answer to that is no, or even not really, maybe not, then it forces you to confront something that throughout this whole cycle, you've been avoiding, which is that no amount of explaining, no amount of patience, no amount of effort on your part is going to change anything. That is where the fight starts to lose its appeal. Up until now, you've been working in this mindset of trying to make it work, trying to fix it, trying to improve it. And then once you start to see that the pattern isn't changing and never will, that the data isn't shifting and never will, that the idea of continuing to fight for a different outcome starts to feel less empowering and it's more draining. That is your breaking point. Again, not explosive, not dramatic. It's just the quiet moment where you're like, you're just, shrug. You're over it. You realize you've been putting in a lot of energy into something that is not giving you any energy back. And for the first time, you start to consider that maybe the solution is not trying harder. The solution is something else entirely. That's where we're going to go next because that something else is not what you think it is. And it's definitely not what I thought it was at the time. But that something else is going to change everything. So if you're listening to this and you're like recognizing yourself in these patterns, just I want you to like take a second and just be aware of that. Because maybe you haven't made that shift yet, but you're like, oh, this sounds very familiar. Like, this is the part where things start to become different. They change, but not because anything has changed yet, but because you're finally seeing things clearly. You're seeing the pattern, the repetition, the emotional energy that you've been putting into something to create a different outcome. That awareness, if you're having it, is really important. It's the first step towards actually doing something different. And my friends, I like hate to leave you on a cliffhanger, but that's where we're going to go in the next episode, part 2 of this. I feel like everything was very heavy. Like I'm actually exhausted, so I feel like absorbing this is a good idea. We'll get into what happens after this. We're going to talk about the shift in the cycle, the mindset that changes everything, and the tools that actually helped me and will hopefully help you move forward without constantly trying to force people to meet you where they've shown you they never will meet you. So if this hits for you, make sure you're following me on Instagram and TikTok at _hotairpod. Head over to my website, hotairwithjoshuarobert.com, to shop my merch, submit your listener stories, and send in your topic suggestions. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, send it to them. Sometimes hearing it from someone else is what is going to make some shit click. And I will be back with part 2 next week, next Tuesday. So keep keeping on, sit with the information you've received, recognize your patterns, maybe realize that the data is showing you that some people are never going to change. And next week, hopefully, we'll wrap this all up in a nice bow. So I will see you next Tuesday.